The setup. The mirror reflected back an ordinary woman in a gray sweater and faded jeans. Catherine Morgan adjusted her simple earrings one final time, knowing that everything about her appearance tonight was carefully calculated. The modest apartment around her told a story of middle-class struggle, but the hidden cameras embedded in her jewelry told a different tale entirely. Day 47 of Project Glass Ceiling, she spoke quietly into her digital recorder. Target, the Excelsior Hotel. This will be my 19th luxury establishment. Catherine wasn't preparing for a typical Friday night out. For 3 years, she had been documenting what she called the Invisibility Project, a groundbreaking social experiment disguised as personal experience. The walls of her apartment were covered with photographs, receipts, and interview transcripts from 18 previous hotels, each one a testament to the invisible barriers that divided American society. Her phone buzzed. Marcus, her producer, had sent a simple message, "Team in position." Catherine smiled slightly. Across the street, hidden cameras were already recording the Excelsior's entrance. In a van nearby, her technical crew monitored multiple feeds. What would appear to be a simple woman seeking a hotel room was actually the final phase of a documentary that would air on national television within weeks. She picked up her worn purse, checking that her platinum credit card was visible in the clear pocket. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had more than enough money to afford the most expensive suite in Manhattan, but tonight, that wouldn't matter. Initial approach commencing at 7 p.m., she recorded, slipping the device into her pocket. If patterns hold, Phase 2 will commence tomorrow at precisely 8 p.m. As she walked toward the door, Catherine thought of her mother, who had spent 30 years cleaning rooms in hotels just like the Excelsior. Tonight wasn't about revenge, it was about making the invisible visible. The Excelsior Hotel staff had no idea they were about to become unwilling participants in a social revolution that would change everything. The rejection. The Excelsior Hotel's lobby gleamed with old-world elegance. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing light across polished marble floors, and the subtle scent of expensive perfume mixed with leather from the lobby's antique furniture. Catherine entered with measured confidence, immediately sensing the shift in atmosphere as eyes turned toward her simple attire. At the reception desk, a blonde woman in a perfectly tailored black suit looked up. Her practiced smile faltered slightly as she assessed Catherine's casual appearance. The nameplate read, "Melissa Winters, Front Office Manager." "Good evening," Catherine said pleasantly, sliding her platinum credit card across the counter. "I'd like your finest available suite, please." Melissa's eyebrows rose as she took in Catherine's gray sweater and jeans. She made no move to touch the card. "Do you have a reservation?" "No, but I checked your website 20 minutes ago. You have 3 suites available." Melissa's smile tightened. "I'm afraid our system must be outdated. We're fully committed tonight." Catherine nodded calmly. "That's interesting. Your online booking system showed real-time availability." Looking shabby, Melissa muttered under her breath, just loud enough for nearby staff to hear. A tall man in an expensive suit approached with authoritative steps. "Is there a problem, Melissa?" "Mr. Reynolds, I was explaining to this person that we're fully booked." Reynolds cast a dismissive glance at Catherine. "I see." He turned to her with practiced condescension. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding about our establishment. The Excelsior maintains certain standards for our clientele." Catherine's hidden cameras captured every word, every expression. "Are you refusing me service based on my appearance?" Reynolds stiffened. "We have a dress code policy clearly outlined on our website, which I reviewed before coming. It states, neat, appropriate attire. Are you suggesting my clothes aren't clean or appropriate?" The confrontation drew attention from other guests. Several people paused their conversations to watch. "The interpretation of appropriate is at management's discretion," Reynolds replied coldly. "And in my professional assessment, your current presentation does not meet Excelsior standards." An unexpected voice cut through the tension. "Excuse me, what's happening here?" The voice belonged to an older gentleman in an impeccably tailored suit. His silver hair and commanding presence drew all eyes. "Mr. Harrington," Reynolds straightened immediately. "Nothing to concern yourself with. Just a misunderstanding about availability." Harrington looked between Catherine and the staff, comprehension dawning. "I couldn't help but overhear. Are you refusing this woman service because of how she's dressed?" "Sir, we have standards," Reynolds faltered. "I've been staying at the Excelsior for 20 years, Harrington interrupted, "and I don't recall judging people by their clothes being one of those standards." Catherine remained silent, observing this unexpected development. Her project had documented dozens of rejections, but never before had someone intervened. "I understand," Catherine finally said, her dignity intact. "Thank you for making your policy so transparent." As she turned to leave, she pressed a small button on her bracelet, the signal that Phase 1 was complete. Outside, she walked calmly to where Marcus waited in an unmarked van. "We got everything," he confirmed, reviewing footage on multiple screens. Their faces when they said, "looking shabby, priceless." Catherine nodded, her expression resolute rather than angry. "Prepare the team for Phase 2 tomorrow night. And call the network, tell them we've got our finale." The network meeting. The network executives' conference room buzzed with anticipation as Catherine's team presented their findings. On the massive screen, footage from the Excelsior played in high definition, every dismissive glance, every whispered insult, every moment of discrimination captured with crystal clarity. 18 luxury establishments, all showing identical patterns, Catherine explained, standing confidently in a professional charcoal suit that transformed her appearance from the previous night. "The Excelsior represents the pinnacle of what we've documented, institutionalized bias disguised as standards and policies." Diana Chen, the network president, leaned forward. "This is powerful, Catherine, but what makes the Excelsior story our finale? We need something that transcends the pattern." Catherine smiled with quiet confidence. "That's why Phase 2 happens tonight." She tapped her tablet, bringing up architectural plans of the Excelsior's grand ballroom. "Tonight, the Excelsior hosts the annual Hospitality Excellence Awards. Every major hotel chain CEO, every influential industry leader will be there." Diana's eyes widened with understanding. "You're not just confronting one hotel. I'm confronting the entire system," Catherine confirmed. 3 years of research has shown this isn't about individual bias, it's about an industry built on visible and invisible barriers. Tonight, we bring those barriers down. Back at her apartment, Catherine reviewed the evening strategy with her team. The wall, once covered with research, was now transformed into a command center with photographs of industry leaders, seating charts for the gala, and multiple contingency plans. "Marcus, your team will be positioned here, here, and here," she indicated on the hotel blueprint. "Emma, you'll coordinate from the van. And Richard," she turned to her tech specialist, "you'll handle the live stream." Richard looked up from his equipment. "Everything's set. The moment you give the signal, we go live to 2 million followers across platforms." Catherine nodded, then moved to her closet. She pulled out the same gray sweater and jeans from the previous night, laying them carefully on her bed. "You're wearing that again?" Emma asked, surprised. "Authenticity is everything," Catherine replied. "This isn't about transformation or revenge. It's about showing that the same person in different contexts is treated differently. The clothes stay the same." As evening approached, Catherine stood before her mirror, adjusting the hidden camera brooch. This time, however, there was a difference, a small lapel pin bearing the logo of her documentary series, a crystal ceiling with hairline fractures spreading across it. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "What you're doing matters. I'll be there tonight. Harrington." Catherine hadn't anticipated this development, but adaptability was key to any successful investigation. As twilight descended over Manhattan, a gleaming black limousine glided through the city streets toward the Excelsior. Inside, Catherine sat calmly, still dressed in her simple gray sweater and faded jeans. 3 minutes to arrival, the driver announced. Catherine pressed her earpiece. All teams, final positions. Remember, we're not creating a spectacle, we're revealing a truth. The return. The black limousine pulled up to the Excelsior's entrance with understated elegance. The doorman, the same one who had looked at Catherine with disdain the night before, immediately straightened and approached with practiced servility. The resolution. 6 months later, Catherine stood before a packed auditorium at Columbia University, delivering the keynote address at the Social Justice in Media Symposium. The success of The Invisibility Project had exceeded every expectation. The documentary had aired to over 15 million viewers and sparked a nationwide conversation about discrimination in the service industry. The Excelsior Hotel, she told the audience, became the catalyst for change we never expected. Within 2 weeks of our documentary airing, they implemented new training programs for all staff on unconscious bias and inclusive service. The response had been swift and comprehensive. The Excelsior had fired Reynolds and reprimanded Melissa, though Catherine had advocated for education rather than termination. More importantly, 18 major hotel chains had revised their policies, creating clear standards that focused on behavior rather than appearance. Mr. Harrington had become an unlikely ally and advocate, using his 40 years of industry influence to push for systemic change. He now served on the board of the Hospitality Equality Initiative, an organization that grew directly from Catherine's work. But the real victory, Catherine continued, wasn't in the policy changes or the media attention. It was in the moment when people realized that their assumptions about others said more about themselves than about the people they were judging. After her speech, Catherine walked across campus, her mind wandering to all the people who had reached out since the documentary aired. Dozens of individuals had shared their own stories of discrimination, but more importantly, hundreds of service industry workers had contacted her to say the project had changed how they treated customers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. New project proposal came in. Hotel chain wants us to consult on their new diversity training program. Interested? Catherine smiled. The work was far from over, but she had proven something important, that one person, armed with truth and determination, could create change that rippled far beyond anything they initially imagined. That evening, she returned to her apartment, now transformed from a research center back into a home. The walls that had once been covered with evidence of discrimination now displayed thank you letters from people who felt seen and heard for the first time. On her desk sat a framed photo from the night at the Excelsior, not of the confrontation, but of the moment afterward when she and Harrington had sat in the hotel's bar, planning how to turn this revelation into lasting change. Her mother called as she was making dinner. "Saw you on the news again today, sweetheart. I'm so proud of what you've accomplished." "Thanks, Mom. I kept thinking about you during the whole project, about how you were invisible to those hotel guests for 30 years. Well, her mother said with a laugh, I'm not invisible anymore. The hotel where I work made me their new diversity training coordinator. Apparently, having insight from someone who's cleaned their rooms gives me a unique perspective." Catherine laughed, tears forming in her eyes. This was what success really looked like, not just policy changes or media attention, but real people being seen and valued for who they truly were. As she hung up the phone, Catherine looked out her window at the city lights of Manhattan. Somewhere out there, in hotels and restaurants and shops across the country, people were being treated with dignity regardless of how they looked. The invisible barriers she had spent 3 years documenting were finally beginning to crack. The project had started with one woman being judged for looking too simple. It had ended with an entire industry learning that the simplest truth of all was also the most profound: every person deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of their appearance. Catherine poured herself a cup of tea and opened her laptop. There was already an email waiting from a group of restaurant workers who had experienced similar discrimination. They wanted to know if she'd be interested in investigating their industry next. She smiled and began to type her response. The work of making the invisible visible was never truly finished, but it was work worth doing. 3 years ago, she had set out to document discrimination. Instead, she had discovered something far more powerful: the capacity for change when people are confronted with truth they can no longer ignore. Outside her window, the city hummed with life, and somewhere in it, a person who might have been turned away was being welcomed instead. That, Catherine knew, made everything worthwhile. The end. Catherine stepped out, still wearing her simple gray sweater and jeans, but now emerging from luxury transportation. The cognitive dissonance was immediate and visible on every face. "Good evening, madam," the doorman said, his tone completely different from the previous night. "Welcome to the Excelsior." Inside, the lobby was transformed for the gala. Industry leaders in expensive suits mingled beneath those same crystal chandeliers, champagne glasses in hand, discussing the very hospitality standards that had been used to exclude her just 24 hours earlier. Melissa Winters was at the reception desk again, but tonight she wore an evening gown appropriate for the special event. When she saw Catherine, her face went pale with recognition, then flushed with confusion. You're back," Melissa stammered. "Yes," Catherine said simply. "I believe you said you were fully booked last night. I'd like to discuss that with your management." Before Melissa could respond, Mr. Reynolds appeared, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm as he recognized Catherine. There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Catherine said calmly. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small device, the digital recorder she'd been using throughout her investigation. "I have everything recorded from last night. Every word about looking shabby, every policy about undesirable guests, every moment of discrimination." The color drained from Reynolds' face. Around them, the gala continued, but several industry leaders had begun to notice the commotion. Mr. Harrington approached from across the lobby, his expression knowing. "Catherine, I presume. I did some research after last night. You're the documentary filmmaker behind the Invisibility Project." Catherine nodded. "And you're the one person in this industry who stood up for basic human dignity." "Thank you." Reynolds looked between them, finally understanding. You're making a documentary about us." "About an entire system," Catherine corrected. "About how the hospitality industry, which claims to serve all people, systematically excludes those who don't meet arbitrary appearance standards." She raised her voice slightly, ensuring nearby guests could hear. "About how hotels that pride themselves on service judge people by their clothing rather than their character or their ability to pay." The conversation was drawing more attention now. Several CEOs had stopped their conversations to listen. Phone cameras were being raised. Diana Chin appeared as if from nowhere. She had been waiting in the crowd, ready for this moment. Catherine Morgan, everyone. The award-winning documentary filmmaker whose latest project has already resulted in policy changes at 3 major hotel chains nationwide. The revelation rippled through the crowd. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was the climax of a carefully orchestrated investigation that had been building for 3 years. "The Excelsior's treatment of Ms. Morgan last night," Diana continued, "represents everything wrong with an industry that has forgotten its purpose, to provide hospitality to all people, regardless of how they look." Reynolds tried to salvage the situation. "This is a misunderstanding. We simply have standards. Standards that allow your staff to call paying customers shabby and undesirable." Catherine asked, her voice carrying clearly across the lobby. "Standards that judge people by their clothes rather than their humanity?" Harrington stepped forward. "I've been in this industry for 40 years, and I can tell you that these aren't standards, they're prejudices dressed up as policies." The room had gone completely silent now. Every person present, industry leaders, hotel staff, and guests, was witnessing something unprecedented, a moment of complete transparency about discrimination that usually happened behind closed doors. Catherine looked around the room at the faces staring back at her, some ashamed, some angry, some finally understanding. "This project was never about revenge," she said clearly. "It was about revelation. It was about showing that when we judge people by their appearance, we miss the opportunity to see who they really are."